Hi everyone, my name is Corrin Swintosky. I'm a freelance criminal paralegal and owner of Lucid Legal Support. In today's video, I want to talk about something very innovative, but innovative in potentially a harmful or detrimental way. Today, I want to talk about facial recognition technology and the current bill that is going through the Minnesota State Senate at this moment. So before I get into what the bill is saying and the state law and what's going on, first I want to talk about what is facial recognition technology. Well, basically, it's a computer system. It uses video or photos of someone's face in order to identify them. So I'm going to get into some examples. The most common example I can think of facial recognition technology is for security purposes. I travel a lot internationally, and honestly, the whole biometrics thing really freaked me out at first. All they need to do is just scan your face. Another really common way that facial recognition technology is used is just unlocking your phone. I don't have this feature personally, but I know if you have a smartphone, which everybody does, you just hold it to your face and then it unlocks. It recognizes your face. Another big one, I'm Gen Z, I grew up with Snapchat. Obviously, with all the filters on Snapchat, they need to detect, match, and identify your face in order to do all the fun filters. Another one I would say more professionally is for fraud prevention. I've heard that a lot of banks nowadays do some biometrics, some facial recognition technology. And the last one and most important example that I want to give is for policing. And police use it to identify suspects, which what we're going to talk about is actually extremely harmful and flawed. So some of the harms of facial recognition technology, there's a really great article from ACLU Minnesota that touched on this. But to give some examples, a little bit from their article and from other sources as well, one of the big harms of facial recognition technology is the random and I would per se, depending on the circumstance, unlawful ways for authorities to surveil and track you. So basically, law enforcement can use certain facial recognition technology. It's going to be a tough one to say in this video, but they can use this software to surveil you without your knowledge. And there's really not too many, if any, laws right now that have a checks and balances system to make sure that they're not surveilling you illegally. Another big harm of facial recognition technology is it's completely biased. I think there's been a ton of studies done on it as well. It's extremely biased towards people of color, women, children, and the elderly. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a tech person, but basically how they're coding it and creating the facial recognition technology is only being able to recognize some people accurately and some people not. And that's a real cause for concern, especially in the policing world for, identifying the wrong person or not identifying the right person. But I think what we're seeing more right now is identifying the wrong person. And this can lead to wrongful arrests, charges, convictions. This is a real problem. We already have an issue with this a lot in our legal system. And to add this piece of technology, which isn't accurate enough to support policing efforts, is really concerning. And if police are just relying on this alone, it's a really big issue. Another harm and problem with facial recognition technology is using it to target certain groups of people. I know there's a lot going on right now in the US regarding immigration, but I've heard and have researched that they are using facial recognition technology to identify refugees, people seeking asylum, and that sort of thing. And finally, I think the other concern that's not being talked about, or if it is talked about and I haven't seen it, fine, but these facial recognition technology platforms are being developed way faster than the laws can keep up with. And I think that's something to consider. I'm actually really surprised that Minnesota is taking action on this right now. If there's other states that are taking action on it, feel free to comment and let me know. Obviously, my business resides in Minnesota, so that's what I follow. I'm surprised they're taking action on it. Technology is way outpacing and being more quicker than these laws coming into place. So I would say, specific to policing now, police in recent years, I think is how long facial recognition technology has been around, can have an over-reliance on that technology without doing a proper investigation into the person. And with biased algorithms and without a lot of training on the data, that again leads to a lot of unlawful arrests, charges, and convictions. I don't really know what would need to be put in place for police to be like, hey, in addition to this, you also need this. I don't know, it's so subjective, right? I mean, ultimately, if you don't know how this works, ultimately when police do an investigation, and they try to get all the evidence they can, they think they found a suspect, it goes to the prosecution, state attorney's office, and then they determine if there's enough evidence for a charge. But a lot of times, they work together and people can make mistakes, as we know and have seen. It might be later on where they're like, actually, we didn't have enough evidence, and the prosecution just dismisses the charges, or they don't charge in the first place. But if you know anything about my business and my website, even an arrest and a charge, I mean, that is a huge detriment and is going to create a lot of barriers for your life moving forward. This seems like kind of stuff that can just, be completely taken care of in the future, but it's not. So I'm going to read a little bit of the bill that's currently going on in Minnesota. For those of you that want to read it and look into it, I highly recommend it. It's SF 1242, Facial Recognition Technology Warrant Act of 2025. So they talk about limitations for the use of facial recognition technology. You cannot use it in a public place to surveil people unless it supports law enforcement activity and it is covered by a court order. So I'm glad that language is in place. However, this is still a very subjective area. Say you're a police officer, you want to use facial recognition technology in a public place where you think this suspect is, you go and get a court order. Well, it's going to be up to the judge, their subjective viewpoint on, is there enough probable cause and evidence to issue this order, right? And I honestly don't know if a lot of judges are educated on this topic enough to really understand the implications of what this is doing. I don't know. Another limitation, basically a law enforcement officer needs to say that there's enough probable cause, i.e. enough evidence to get this court order in order to use the facial recognition technology. And there's a lot of case law on probable cause, but that's another thing to think about too. I mean, usually case law determines this stuff, right? I don't know if there's a lot of case law, if any, out there yet about facial recognition technology, obtaining the use of it, and having enough probable cause for it. It'll be interesting. They also mention that if the court order is denied, facial recognition surveillance shall be terminated at the time of denial. So I guess there's that. I guess for me, they still have your information. Even if they terminate it at denial, it's like, okay, well, they had so much up until that point. The bill also talks about the duration of the orders. It does say not to authorize over 30 days. The courts cannot authorize an order for only 30 days with some exceptions. And the court can also grant a 30-day extension. Now, I'd be really curious what this is for. What would be needed for that, right? I mean, 30 days is quite a long time. You either found the person, they were supposed to be at this public place, or they weren't. I don't know. I'm making it a little black and white, but that's just me. There's also a minimization requirement that the bill talks about. It says law enforcement needs to minimize acquiring other individuals' faces for recognition if it's not the focus of their efforts. So appreciate that. Would really love to see how that's going to be put in practice. I'm curious. And then it also talks about potential motions to suppress. Motion to suppress is basically you submit a document to the court explaining, hey, based on this legal issue, I want to suppress this evidence in my case. So some people may be able to move to suppress the information that was gained through facial recognition technology based on a couple factors. A couple here that I wanted to highlight are if a police officer unlawfully obtains an order. So that'll be really interesting to see whether there was enough probable cause in the first place in order to obtain the facial recognition technology and surveil people that way. Another way that someone may move motion to suppress is if they didn't follow the conditions of the court order, which I think that makes sense. That's pretty fair. Or if the information that granted the order was not sufficient evidence to establish probable cause, which I just got done talking about, which again, are we going to see case law on this? Is the case law going to be upheld from the past on this? There is a lot that can happen between now and until the bill could potentially become a law. I hope people that are smarter than me speak on this more. Having the right people bring these issues to light. I'm just a criminal paralegal, right? I can go based off what I see, what I know, my knowledge and experience, but I'll be really curious to see how this plays out. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. If you guys have any thoughts, feel free to comment, subscribe if you found this interesting, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.